Good evening to everyone. And I'm from Sri Lanka. I'm A. TIEMS, working at the Central Engineering Consultancy Bureau. My topic is focusing on the rectification of road-based uncertainty in landslide disaster emergencies. So once you come to the landslide disaster, so you naturally see the beautiful mountain and the development in the Tour region very beginning. With the time being, the people naturally start moving the upslopes. So there is a stage. It's naturally transformed into the hazardous area because of the human intervention against ecosystem restoration. So that is the point we are always talking about, the complete exceed the carrying capacity. That was the very unpredictable stage of the human eye or the human understanding with the nature. So that's end up with the disaster, natural disaster situation from a landslide. So when you come to the disaster strike, so you always encounter the victims and also the unrest and also expecting relief, mobility, and also there is a peak of responsibilities, inabilities are there, and the risks and the disaster which link with the requirement for the adaptability. So it means the social and technical inadequacy is a very common in nature with the landslide disaster or any disaster event. In Sri Lanka, can I just brief update our one of the ministries called the Ministry of Disaster Management, coming under the National Council for Disaster Management. Usually, the head of the council is the HA, that's the president of the country. And also there are a set of leaders are coming under the prime minister, leader of the oppositions and something like that. And also there are a set of ministries which comes the priority basis like social services, rehabilitation, reconstruction, home affairs, health, housing, science and technology, irrigation, cost conservation, so these are then it's been naturally having the better link of managing the risks at the time of disaster. So at the same time, in the long run, the disaster management approaches. When you discuss about the disaster impact, how it's be going to the impact to your economic development, that's very common law at the moment. At the time of disaster impact, it's bring it to the quite very big loss to the economic point of view. But at the same time, with the rehabilitation and the adaptability, so you may have a chance of bringing it to the another new trend line. Sometimes it's not much tally with the same thing, but it's more with the upward trend. And also needs to be common pattern of incident commanding plan for road-based disaster emergency. But I'm very much concerned about it, the various type of disaster incidents with the road sector. It always naturally combined with the landslide, the very high prominent, the floods, dam failure, river scale, cyclone, tsunami. All these sectors are naturally coming and blend with this those situations. And a standard operation procedures and the plan for incident commanding plan, which naturally coincide with the incident specific checklist, command operation, logistic, planning, and finance. Now, my focus is very much focused with the road-based disasters. Now, at the time of designing, because we want to climb up the hill country. So at that time, the road design-based slope vulnerability issues are very common. When you start cutting with the smooth slopes from the natural slopes, you automatically bring it to the disaster situation. You can do many designs, but there are limitations. Then naturally you have to be tolerate to a certain level of in order to build up the road sector development in the hill country. So with that, I think I will show some of the very important physical features to get it very understand the depth and the extent of the problem. The landslides are just a phenomenon. It is sense of the downward and outward movement, the soil or the rock. So it be naturally, we are very much concerned about the height, depth, and the inclinations. Those are the basic parameters when we start concerned of the landslide disaster or the rock fall, and those are the earth resources disaster-based activities. So when you have, this is a Sri Lankan content at the moment. So it's be very heavy rain. Hello. Yeah, it's be very heavy rain naturally encountered in the highland area of the country. At the same time, you can see the middle map really indicating the red dots. Naturally, entire mountain area now clustered with the landslide disaster. And at the time of disaster, naturally our army officials and the many rehabilitation and relief professionals are working together. So that is the approach at the movement. I just want to bring it to the depth and extent of the landslide disaster happening in Sri Lanka. It's not only just touching the road really, even the entire mountain ranges and the large community living areas are meeting together, getting the very bad effect to the country's development. So at the same time, the people's considerations towards the disaster management bring it to the very high level. Now, these are the very much prominent figures I just adding with the road-based disasters really. So in especially highway sector, you getting the number of large-scale landslides, and sometimes the road gets stuck with the cruising approximately 1 to 2 days time. So those are the very common incidents. Not only that, it's be critically affected to the hill country. We had a very nice, very beautiful hill country in Sri Lanka, very attractive hill country. But unfortunately, some of the places are very prominent in the critical disasters from the landslides. This is the one of the event happened in whatever, which is the Colombo, but one of the main rail tracks stuck in nearly closer to the 1 year period. After that, fortunately, we spend a big amount of money and mitigate the activity. The particular study, really, I'm trying to bring it to the one of the study we are concerned about the road-based activity. So this is very much focusing with the rectification road-based uncertainty, identifying road-based uncertainty in landslide disaster emergencies. So bring it to some of the road features in our Sri Lankan content. You can see we blend with the mountain and climbing to the mountain. So our studies extend to identify the different type of failures, so which come with the different slope angle, exposure conditions, upper slope vegetation, and the total height of the slopes, and the failure and so on. So with that, we came up with a different pattern of failure which is closer to the road based really. So we identified very immediate failure very closer to the vicinity, so that sometimes coming with the completely weathered rock or sometimes with the soil. At the same time, we always notice that some of the weathered rock also is sensitive in the closer to the road sector, because some mountain we don't have a relevant buffer zone. We may not be able to allow the buffer zone, because otherwise the cut is very high. So then there are a lot of conditions need to be incorporated. At the same time, with upper slopes, so there are natural chance of it closer to the vicinity, sometimes we can manage it, but problem is the upper slope, naturally connected with the naturally destabilization of rocks, really. So those are sometimes reactivation due to the roads sector activity, and also there is a tendency of the disintegration of rock is common in many places in the mountain. So at the same time, there are bouncing, deflections, and those matters also very much concerned. So coming to our study really, we bring it to the identification of the geological conditions of cut slope assessment, and work out what is the most reasonable, satisfactory level of designs for those in order to avoid these unexpected failure conditions. Then we come like about 3 to 4 meters height is the maximum level we can manage with those conditions. At the same time, vegetation's conditions above the upper slope also be much concerned about the assessment. Then we come another level of assessment which declare the certain to 2 to 2.4 meters. So then coming with the conclusion, so we study extend to the evaluation of those incidents, how it's going to affect with the road designs. we ultimately came up with if the cut is less than 3.2 meters, it will be reasonably manageable with the upper slopes. So those are the conditions. But at the same time, I should want to notice that some of the rock falls and upper slopes the rolling boulders are not counted in this study. So coming to the conclusion, so our research is proved that both landform and the combination of factors, data of the soil slope, improve the criteria of the design appropriate remedial measures. So that is the fastest approach we can input into at the stage of designing. At the same time, the findings forced to pay more attention on geometrical evidences of slopes to be considered with an appropriate remedial design. That is the second most important parameter at the time of designs, really. Therefore, landslide road has a resilient feature of the landform need to be identified in the various ground cross surveys. Many evidences of down instability educated us to understand the evidently based stability potential subject to various forms of landform geometries. Now, even immediately after the event, also be very much concerned with error. At that time, the principal policies and method to be applied in carrying out road-based lands and disaster management and emergency operation. In Sri Lankan content, we are continuing to study the road sector and with the mapping and the various studies incorporated into the preparing before the emergency. That means we had covered the options such as the road evacuation plans, family contact cards, and the preparedness kits, and the response mechanisms. At the stage of at the time of disaster, so at this, we have a relief and evacuation basis arrangement with the disaster management center. Those people are very much active at the moment, and also there is a special organization called the National Building Research Organization. They will put up their maximum effort to give the clear awareness of the avoid to continuous disaster event at the time of failure. At the same time, rehabilitation also now put into the very high levels. The structural remedial measures incorporate with the green engineering, is incorporate into our disaster management. I think with that, I will conclude my presentation. So thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Gregory Vigneault, and thank you for coming to this talk titled Managing Uncertainty and Emergency Management Through Explanation. This is going to be a very philosophical talk. My work surrounding emergency management is of a philosophical nature. This talk draws heavily from the Chilean biologist turned philosopher Humberto Maturana, in particular his work around explanation, as well as my interpretation of that work, which is then fed through my own personal experience fighting forest fires around the United States. So in being a philosophical talk, there's sort of this, we need to walk through a couple bridges of meaning before we can get to the explanation part. And the first bridge we need to cross is we need to consider what uncertainty is. And it's sort of my pivotal stance I'm going to take here this morning is that uncertainty is a product of unclear relationships of cause and effect. And in particular, what I'm after here is when we're working within the emergency manager's operational context, is it's filled with effects. It's things, such as incidents, situations, experiences, things we can touch, hear, smell, and even measure. The effects that I'm particularly interested in today are large problems, such as, global climate change adaptation, the global wildfire management problem, workforce retention and development, and emergency management. So I'm interested in these effects, and in particular, sort of parts of those effects, because you can't tackle them all at once because they're too big. So when we're talking about uncertainty in this way, we have effects, things we can experience, but there are no causes attached to them. We have no way of discerning what is producing the effect that we are dealing with. So we have things that we can observe and interact with, but we don't have a way of understanding what's producing them or what's generating them. So I think there's at least three modalities of uncertainty. And the first one is sort of pictured here. You have an effect, and then you have like a lot of fog. Let's call it a fog, a dense rolling fog that you can't see through. So you have no idea where the cause is that you're looking for or what it might be. It's just completely occluded. The second sort of archetype of uncertainty that we deal with is you have an effect, and then it's just sort of a desolate landscape behind it, and you have nothing there from which you could sort of forge or create a cause that might sort of be responsible for the effect you're dealing with. And lastly, and I think this is my favorite one, is you have an effect, a problem you're dealing with, and there's a multiplicative of causes that could possibly be responsible for that effect, but you don't have the capacity or time or computational power to figure out which one of those causes is the correct one. So if we are in a world where uncertainty is caused by unclear relationships of cause and effect, then our move to manage that uncertainty is to rejoin cause and effect. And my contention is that we do that through explanation. So while we are sort of dealing with uncertainty, we have this strange experience of knowing what is happening, but not knowing why what is happening is happening. So there's probably a few different ways to do this. Some people use complexity or chaos, but I really wanted uncertainty to stand alone as its own place, its own area with boundaries, its own context. And when we are in the uncertain domain, what we have are it's a partial world. It is a world, a context, a domain that is filled with, you know, a few different effects of things that we have observed and taken in and interacted with. But because we only have effects and we don't yet understand their causes, you get this sort of partial world where knowledge is incomplete. So it's a very difficult place to operate within because you don't know why the things that you're seeing and interacting with are occurring. So the certain domain is adjacent to the uncertain domain. You end up in the uncertain domain once you've been working relationships of cause and effect for a while. Say you've understood a problem for years, and you've established all these relationships of cause and effect. So therefore you understand how it works, and you can measure it, and you can rely on it, and even build strategy upon it. Until one day you have one or more effects, and they start to evolve quite rapidly and in such a way that the causes that we understood as being responsible for these effects can no longer account for them. So you have these relationships, these relationships of causality that are starting to break down, and you're not sure what's happening. You can't quite make sense of it anymore. And this is an indicator that you're going to end up into the uncertain domain. You end up in the uncertain place where you bring with you a lot of effects, but you have no causes. If you had those causes, you could move back to the certain domain. And there's surely a space between certainty and uncertainty, but for simplicity's sake, I think it's easiest to talk about it like that. So if you are noticing in your certain context that things are starting to shift and deteriorate and change, that's a signal that you're ending up in uncertainty, and you need to start changing the way that you act and sort of your posture in the world. And I think there's two sort of major things we need to do, three rather. The first one is you need to become a champion of studying and understanding the effects that you are working with. While you don't have causes, you can still gain perhaps a little bit more knowledge, and sort of improve your world a little bit more by coming to understand the effects that you're dealing with, their component parts and their relationships and their interdependencies between them, possibly the history, the characteristics, the dynamics. You really get to understand what it is that you're dealing with, and while you still don't have a complete picture because you're missing that cause, you do have improved knowledge. Now, that sort of its dual purpose, that information about those effects, you can bring with you to the explanatory part of this talk and use it to help build causal propositions because you understand the effects very well. Second, emergency managers are sort of, always needing to make decisions. Just because you're in an uncertain space doesn't mean you don't get, doesn't mean you can sort of forget making decisions and developing strategy and tactics. So you need to continue decision making. And one of the ways you can be sort of cautious about this, because you don't know what's going on around you completely, is you take big decisions and you break them down into component parts. And in doing so, you can sort of release or deploy components of decisions. And in doing so, you increase your cycle times. So the decision is deployed, it's implemented, it's evaluated, and that information is fed back to decision makers. So you can do this really fast, and you can learn really quickly and figure out what's working and what's not. And you do this over and over and over again. You keep breaking down decisions and releasing them into parts. Lastly, these two are related. When it comes to strategy and tactics, you're still working at uncertainty. What you want to do is sort of focus on short time horizons, work with presence. So it's the present plus a little bit. And you want to do this because you don't know what's happening, what's causing your world to operate the way that it is. So you only sort of extend yourself out a little bit. You don't overcommit yourself. You don't go too far into the future where you're taking on even more uncertainty, but rather you're sort of just a few steps ahead of yourself, and you have tight feedback loops where operators can feedback information to key decision makers, and you can adjust that strategy as necessary. So I think emergency management and surely the emergency services are really good at functioning with uncertainty in the uncertain domain, kind of living there. I've heard it called operating in the gray, and I've always liked that. So you are dealing in this, you are living in this space that you have 50% knowledge of, and you only have, you're dealing with sort of a fractured context where you have effects but no causes to explain them. So I would not call that managing uncertainty. I think that is living or dwelling with uncertainty, and that should be part of your craft to a certain extent, but not necessarily define it as it relates to uncertainty. What you want to be doing is getting out of the uncertain domain and back to the certain one, or pushing stuff back to the certain domain. So you're dealing with less uncertainty, and you can sort of resume more effective emergency management practices. So as we talked about earlier, to get out of uncertainty, the key move is to rejoin cause and effect. And according to Maturana, you do this through explanations, which always follow the format: if this and this happens, then the result is such and such. Now, reading into this a little bit more, if this and this happens, that's a cause. That's where the cause lives. Then you have the result is such and such. That's the effect. So in this like small little format, we're joining cause and effect. And I admit that explanations are a very sort of quotidian part of everyday life. What I'm doing is I'm pulling them out of everyday life and making them sort of a remarkable thing that you would do in a workshop, because they are concerned with managing and causality. And because they're concerned with causality, they're concerned with managing uncertainty, and as a result, effective emergency management. So as we explain things, we join cause and effect and literally explain away the uncertainty that previously existed, and we now have a solid basis for decision making once again. So what we're trying to do by moving from uncertainty to certainty is creating a complete world that we have much, not complete knowledge of. I don't want to go that far, but much, much better knowledge of. And we're not trying to find a cause that would bring us down to some primordial objective reality, but it's sort of one that's artificial, that works for us. It's sort of just good enough to get us to the next thing that we have to do. So This is, with all that context having been put in place, I think this might make sense a little bit easier. I borrowed this all from Maturana in my own sort of insights from studying his work. I borrowed from him the informal condition and the generative mechanism. The rest in this design here are of my own making, because I wanted to find a way. It seemed important studying this work to be able to put explanations to work in the role of managing uncertainty. So what you would do here is you would bring people into the conference room, and would make use of a whiteboard and expo markers and sticky notes. And we enter in from the uncertain domain on the bottom left with an effect that we are uncertain about. We do not know how it is generated. And because we don't know how it's generated, we don't really know what to do with it or how to approach it or how to develop an intervention to start solving that problem. So the first thing that we do is we sort of ascend up the arc here to the generative mechanism. Now, to Maturana, generative mechanisms are any mechanisms that, if allowed to operate, would produce or account for the experiences that we had. Now, he still uses the same explanatory format, and I'm just widening what he says and using more transparent language, I think, to say this is where we generate a causal proposition that we could attach to the effect that we walked into this process with. And in doing so, manage uncertainty. So you want to enter this space with the effect, as well as all of the information that you gained while you were studying that effect in the uncertain domain, where you got to know it and sort of got an understanding of not necessarily its origins, but how it works and how it interacts with other things and how you can handle it. So you also bring in the research that's directly related to that part of the problem, that effect, and the research that is sort of closely related and distantly related. And then you want to populate your workshop attendees with people who have been working with this problem on the ground for a long time, people who have written on this, as well as your entire team who are hoping to work on this problem and solve part of it over a number of years. This process begins by being incredibly divergent. You want to sort of have people just come up with anything. It could be a full causal proposition. If this and this happens, then it would point towards that effect. Or we're coming up with portions of causal propositions. We say, oh, this could be part of the causality we're looking for, or this could be part of it, or this could be also generating it. And while we're doing this, we want to have the workshop facilitator kind of arranging things by theme and perhaps by category. And we're starting to get a sense of what the group is thinking and what the possibilities are for generating a cause. So then you want to be quite convergent with what you do, and you want to very slowly, and I can't stress enough, not too quickly, move towards a single cause by drawing from everything that was done during the divergent phase. So once you have created a cause, you can bring that effect up to the generative mechanism space on this tool here. And then you join cause and effect. And that is decidedly the most important part of this process, because you are now saying this effect is being produced by this cause. So now you understand where the effect came from, and you have therefore reduced, or at the very least minimized, the uncertainty around that effect. And we haven't really talked about this part yet, but you have also reduced the uncertainty around the cause, which up until this point you could not find or locate. So you have reduced uncertainty around the causality as well. And you have this solid explanation that's telling you this is the way the world works. And now that we know this is the way the world works, we are prepared to go out and do something about it. So the next phase is the design phase, where you take the explanation that you wrote that might be quite academic-y and jargony and technical, and you take that explanation and you look at it and you try to find its intent. You say, okay, so if this is the way the world is working, what does it want us to do? And what does it want us to do? Like, what should we do with this? And
Gregory,
yes.
Sorry to interrupt. You've got 2 minutes left.
Thank you, sir. We'll be on point. And you go through this and you say, okay, so if this is what it's telling us to do, what do we need to design? What do we need to create to give to other people so they can go implement this in a way that is consistent with the way we understand the world to be and the world in which we have reduced uncertainty from? So then you come down to the informal condition phase and you hand that to people, but Maturana says it's really not that simple, because everybody has these informal conditions, which are these little biases that sort of filter out, filter everything that you're doing. It's their perception of you, how they've already explained the problem, and so forth. So you're sort of coming down the mountain, coming down the arc here and saying, this is what we think we should go do based upon this understanding of the world, this explanation of it. And there's going to be some negotiation as you're like, so this is what we think we should do. This is the strategy we developed. This is the tool you could use. And that negotiation, because this is an iterative process, is likely to send you back to the generative mechanism phase. Perhaps somebody in the group said, hey, I've been doing this for 15 years. I've got a few things you left out, and you need to redraft that causal proposition, redesign the artifact you created, and then try to pass it through the informal condition again. And then finally, let's say we made it through that with only one iteration, which is highly doubtful, but for purposes of this talk, then we release it out into the world and observe everyone's behavior and see if they're acting in a way that is consistent with what has been designed based on an explained version of the world that we sort of took part in to manage the uncertainty that we had previously found there, and observe and evaluate and see if they're acting consistently with that world, with that managed uncertainty, and even interact with them and ask them, hey, with what you're doing right now, how uncertain are you? Do you feel like you're standing on stable ground? That's sort of the general approach to using explanations to manage uncertainty. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, and good afternoon once again. Thank you for having me attend the conference. Today I'll be presenting on the topic titled Malaria Risk Prediction Modeling using Multi-Criteria Decision Evaluation in the Northern Zone of Plateau State, Nigeria. Here are the few outlines I'll be presenting in the course of the presentation today. So as a background, over 100 countries are said to be affected by malaria infection globally, representing 40% of the world. The global economic impact of the disease is quite huge, particularly in Africa, where the disease is ravaging most of the countries. It costs about $12 billion annually to manage the disease in Africa. The sub-Saharan Africa is said to be the epicenter of the disease, accounting for 95% of the global cases and 96% of the deaths recorded so far. Nigeria as a country records the highest number of cases of the disease, with 27% of the global cases and 30% of the deaths that are recorded annually. 1 in 4 persons is said to be infected with malaria, and 1 in 4 deaths is observed to be as a result of malaria infection. That's according to the WHO reports of 2022. So our key pertinent question we need to ask about in the course of this study is, what are the contributory factors to malaria transmission, and how can we model these factors to predict the endemic prone regions within our study area? To do this, we aimed at employing multi-criteria decision evaluation to develop a predictive model that evaluates the spatial heterogeneity of the disease within our study area. And to achieve this, we use the objective of comprehensive analysis of the distribution, the transmission dynamic, and examine the associated risks of the disease within our study area. So we leverage on some key literatures. Key amongst them is the work of Gutierrez et al. In 2008, We use geospatial tools to detect the spatial pattern of malaria and delineate the hotspots of the disease in South Africa. Additionally, Kaswa et al. Also used GIS spatial multi-criteria evaluation to identify areas prone to malaria epidemics in Ethiopia. Lastly, Antonio et al. Used remote sensing, climatic data, and multi-criteria evaluation to model malaria risks for the implementation of indoor residual spraying as a vector control measure in Madagascar. Most of these articles are quite timely, and they use a very sound technology to analyze malaria risks. However, they had limitations in the fact that they did not consider the holistic possessive risk factors in modeling the malaria. This we overcame by looking at the holistic the malaria transition risks within our study area. So our study area is located in Plateau State, north central Nigeria. The heterogenic geomorphology, topography, and hydrological composition of the study area made it possible for us to identify most of the transmission risks of the disease within our study area. So here are some of the data sets we use in the course of the modeling. So to start with, we started by, first of all, looking at the study area in terms of the geomorphology, the topography, the hydrological composition, the land use patterns, and of course, the demography, to be able to help us identify the malaria transmission risks within the study area. We got most of the information through extensive study of literature and, of course, interview with experts within the study area. Moving further, we're able to identify the malaria risks and categorize them into three, namely ecological, meteorological, socioeconomic, and of course, we use epidemiological data as a guide in the development of the model. So an intensive examination of the ecological risk factors, it was able to help us understand the transmission dynamics of the disease, the vector-host interaction, the spatial breeding habitat, and the vector breeding behavioral pattern of the disease within our study area. That of the meteorological risk factor gave us a better understanding of the vector breeding habitat, the vector behavioral pattern, and the transmission dynamics. Lastly, the socioeconomic risk factor, we have a better understanding of the vector-host interaction, the transmission dynamics, and the behavioral pattern. The annual parasitic index of cases we analyzed gave us a better understanding of the prevalence of the disease and the intensity of the cases within our study area. Moving further, we use an analytic hierarchy process to identify and classify the relative weights of the different malaria risk factors and the parameters within our study area. We chose the analytic hierarchy process because it's been described to have to be best amongst other techniques, making quantitative decisions such as the one we're making. It performs better in terms of accuracy and consistency. It also gives avenues for experts to participate in the modeling, which is very important in developing the model because they will be the end users. Also, it synthesizes complex problems, making them look simpler. Going further, we use a 9 degrees pairwise comparison matrix to interview various experts within the field of the study area and are experts in the field of malaria. So they use a 9 degrees intensity of importance to rate and rank the different parameters and risk factors accordingly. So we now tested the consistency of their judgment by taking consistency tests, and we now eliminated those interviews that were wrongly answered. Coming back to the lab, we synthesized these interviews into a single matrix using geometric mean, and then we estimated the relative weights of the different parameters and risk factors. Moving further, we carry out a correlation matrix to be able to assign controlling weights to the different risk factors, malaria risk factors within the study area. And then we use ArcGIS to synthesize the different weights with the corresponding risk factors, and we produce a risk map for our study area. The risk maps give us an intrinsic understanding of the areas in terms of its malaria transmission risks. And we found out that areas such as Jos North, Jos South, and Breaking-Ladi will definitely have high risks of the disease based on the parameters we analyze and the risk factors. We went ahead to estimate the area coverage and then classify these risk factors based on the degree of vulnerability into 5 risks. Majorly the very low risks ranging to the very high risks of the study area. To validate our model, we collected reported cases of the disease within our study area, and we carried out a density and a hotspot analysis to see whether these cases would actually align with the risk map we produced. And then we also plotted the receiver's operation characteristics and estimated the area under the curve to give us a better understanding of the model performance rates. So going further, based on the accurate assessment of the study area we did, the moderate risks to very high risk areas were observed to have the following characteristics. They have steeper topography. They have low distributions of water bodies, both stagnant and flowing. The settlement patterns seems to be highly sparse, and then the area seems to have low population density, and hence the low risks of the disease. Whereas, in contrast, the high risks of the areas that are termed high risks, they have flatter terrains in terms of topography, denser settlement patterns, high population density, and also high distributions of water bodies, both stagnant and flowing. Going further, we carried out a density and hotspot analysis, and we found out that indeed the study found out that the distribution of the reported cases of the disease actually were closer around areas that the model predicted to have high risks, that is around Jos North, Jos South, and Breaking-Ladi. This actually validated the risk map model that we developed earlier. And then we also looked at the statistical significance. It gave us a statistical significance of 90 to 99% confidence level of predicting hotspots and cold spots of the disease within the study area. Moving further, the receiver's operation curve we plotted the sensitivity against the inverse of the sensitivity. It gave us a 98% accuracy level of predicting malaria within our study area. This makes the models very accurate in terms of malaria prediction. In conclusion, the examination of the various risk factors which we carried out gave us a valid insight into the intricate dynamics of vector behavioral pattern, the human interaction, and of course, the suitable breeding habitat, and then the different modes of transmission of the disease within our study. And lastly, because we use expert participation in developing the model, the implementation of the different vector management measures will be easier because the targeted audience, which are the experts, will be the one to implement it. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm open to more questions, and contributions. Thank you.
Good afternoon, all. My name is Nemethia Jacob Amakama from France, and I will be the one handling the presentation session for my team. So this afternoon, we are going to be looking at an evaluation of the effect of ambulance strategy on patient mortality outcome from hospital system, which is basically a modeling and simulation study in the context of industrial disaster response. So for our content, we are going to be looking at 5 distinct aspects. The first is introduction, including the background of this particular study. Furthermore, we are going to look at the objectives of the study. And then we're going to look at the methodology, the materials that we employed in the course of the study. And then furthermore, we are going to look at our outcomes in the form of results, and then finally the inferences we're able to draw based on the findings from this particular study. So this study, in terms of the background, is rooted in the popular disaster management continuum, which includes the preparedness, which is the planning and the preparation that is done concerning disaster before they occur, including the installation of early warning systems. And there's also the response aspect of it, which are the actions taken during and after disaster to protect life and also to protect critical infrastructures. And then the recovery aspect, which deals basically with how to restore affected community and also to build resilience in preparation for similar or other kind of disaster that may strike this other particular region. And then the mitigation aspect, which actions taken to reduce or eliminate risk and also to prevent further risks happening in the future. However, our concern is on the response aspect of the disaster management continuum. And then for us to move ahead, in this study, we actually delved into the modeling and simulation of a hypothetical oil and gas industry explosion case. And then our focus lies on examining how healthcare units would intervene and respond in the aftermath of an emergency situation. And so our scenario starts with a regional hospital that is in operation in a region, and then carrying out basic routine activities, including triaging, treatment, operations, and hospitalization. And then there's also an oil and gas industry that is also undertaking routine activities, which results in an explosion that prompts the regional hospital to deploy resources in form of ambulances and other critical resources in order to convey the affected victims from the incident site down to the regional hospital. However, having sensed some form of surge within the system, the regional hospital had to get in contact with the mobile field hospital, which also is deployed, and then they are also coming in with their own capabilities, including an operating room, a pre-operating room, and a ward, and also ambulances, which are there to aid with the transportation of victims from the incident site to the mobile field hospital, and also how both of them interacting in order to optimize the system to save more life. And this study, actually, this aspect of the study deals with the conceptualization, the modeling, and the simulation of this particular scenario that we were able to develop. And then we went further to perform global sensitivity analysis, because validating agent-based model is a Herculean task. And so we went further to try to understand the performance of impacting factors in our model, and also how we could improve the predictive capabilities of whatever we obtain from the model. And then for our objective, we have two well-defined objectives. Our first objective is actually to conceptualize, model, and simulate this interaction of this mobile field hospital that is deployed to assist as a strategy to save more life, and the regional hospital employing NetLogo, agent-based modeling and simulation in this disaster scenario. And then our second objective deals with an evaluation of the impact and the contribution of our input variables, which we chose based on the strategy that we want to investigate. And then we see how this affects the mortality outcome from the interaction between healthcare system. Now, resting on the foundation of computational system modeling framework, we were able to develop a 4-phase methodology, starting with the model conceptualization, which is a pre-simulation stage where we're able to conceptualize and simplify the components of our system. And then went further for the model formalization in phase 2 and data generation. This is where the actual coding took place. Furthermore, we employed other tools to analyze the model data that we were able to generate from the phase 2. And then finally, we conducted a model verification to see if the model is actually carrying out the design for which we have developed for it by conducting a sensitivity analysis. Now, agent-based modeling and simulation is usually a bottom-to-top approach that is employed in order to understand the complexity in system dynamics. And then to move ahead, the model conceptualization, what we did was to utilize a business process management annotation, BIZAGI, and DrawIO to document the conceptualized process that we have developed of the interaction between the healthcare system. Then we did this, and then what we did was to simplify our system based on available literatures, where we considered both the emergency department of the mobile field hospital, which is a miniature structure that functions as an emergency department, and a regional hospital. And then this work, one of the most profound works was that carried out by Uriarte et al. In 2015, and most recently by Sayama in 2023. So this helped us to simplify the already complex process, because basically emergency departments accounts for about 50% of most admission into hospitals, especially in disaster situations. And then we did this specifically for us to have an easy understanding of our flows, the activities in our system, the decisions that will be taken by the agents in our system, and then also the interaction within our process, and also to see how we could evaluate and identify bottlenecks within our system as the simulation runs, and also areas where we can effect some kind of improvement. And then for the phase 2, we went further to use the NetLogo 6.3.0, which is the most recent version of the software, to code and then develop a user interface for the particular process. So figure 5 shows us, looks complicated, I know, but it actually shows us the simulation interface after when we have employed the method of coding the NetLogo system. And then we further went ahead to use a feature within the NetLogo space called the behavioral space to experiment and generate some very interesting scientific data. And we did this for 720 iterations. And then also interesting about our user interface is the ability for our model to give us a real-time patient status in each of the components. So we can tell as the system runs, as our model runs, we can tell the number of patients that are waiting to be admitted into the pre-operating or the operating room. We could also tell the number of patients that are left in the incident site, and then the position also of our ambulances. And then we have free visual entities movement within our system. And also interesting, we could also have we also saw a real-time count and plots of key performance indicators within our system, such as the number of deaths. We could tell of the number of deaths in the mobile field hospital. We can also see real-time how many persons are being transferred to the morgue, also in the regional hospital, and also the combined effect having the total deaths. And then we, before now, also did another aspect of the key performance indicator, where we consider the mean wait time, which I presented in the Qatar conference last week. So for the materials that we employed, we used the NetLogo, including the behavioral space for the simulation and the experimentation, where we're able to sample and then also generate data. And then we employed the Pandas tool, and then which is a Python-based software, where we did some data manipulation, cleaning, filtering, aggregation. And then finally, we used the sensitivity analysis library including the NumPy and the matplotlib plot to investigate the influence and the contribution of each input variables in order to investigate our interest in the ambulance strategy and other input variables. And then this combination of tools gave us a very interesting exploratory insight into the behavior and the dynamics of our model outcome, especially as it deals with the oil and gas industry episode which we are modeling. So moving further, we obtained some result, and then we choose to first of all investigate the effect of the ambulance dispatch strategy on the mortality outcome from our modeled system. And then what we did was to visualize our dataset spread between the ambulance strategy group, because we are looking at a situation where what will happen if we have a system that doesn't have any support emergency service. And then we also look at a situation where we need to deploy other emergency service like the mobile field hospital to assist and interact in a seamless manner, and for us to have patients taken for treatment and also to reduce mortality outcome. And then from our analysis, we got this box plot, which gave us a non-overlapping median depth, which basically implies that there's a statistical significance difference between the two ambulance strategies. So when we have, based on our proposal, a mobile field hospital as a system that will aid in the treatment of transportation and treatment of victims, we had lesser death outcomes. And then we also looked at the range, which also gave us some idea into the variability between our two strategy group. And then we did a similar analysis on the number of lives that could be saved in this particular scenario. And we found out that with the alternate strategy of deploying the mobile field hospital, we have lesser mortality outcome. Now, these results basically substantiated our expectation that the impact of our ambulance strategy will have a key effect from system when there's a scenario that is similar or that is exactly the same as ours. And then we went further to look at a verification via sensitivity analysis. And so what we did was to use the Sobol sensitivity analysis from the sensitivity analysis library in Python. And then what happens here is that there's 3 different indices that we can actually use to measure the contribution of the input variables as it affects the variance of the mortality outcome. So for the total sensitivity index, the impact of the ambulance strategy shows that the model has very high sensitivity. Now, this particular index captures the total contribution of each input factor to the output variance, including both the direct and the interaction with other factors, and also represents the overall importance of each factor in explaining the variance of the model output. And then looking at them individually, the ambulance strategy shows high sensitivity, which denotes that slight fluctuations or uncertainty in this particular input variable could considerably affect our outcome in terms of death. And then, but for the number of injured patient, which is also a variable in this case, it demonstrated a low degree of sensitivity. So if we vary any aspect of this, it might really not have so much effect on the mortality outcome. However, for the number of ambulances, it plays an essential role, as it influenced considerably the variance in the output variable. So what this entails is that in situations like this, we should have the optimal number of ambulances that should be deployed in this kind of emergency scenario, because lesser ambulances will require more runs and to cause delays and then result in more deaths. And then for the first order sensitivity index, we found some consistency between what happened in our total index and the first order sensitivity index. Now, this index measures the proportion of the total output variance that can be attributed to each individual input factor, while we keep other factors constant, and it also quantifies the direct effects of each factor on our model output. And then for our second order index, which is the last index that we considered in our sensitivity analysis, this index basically measures the interaction effect between pairs of input factors, and it basically provides insight into how two factors jointly can influence the model output. And then for this particular sensitivity analysis, we found a slight interaction between the ambulance strategy and the variable injured patients, and then we also found a moderate level of interaction between the ambulance strategy and the number of ambulances, which is quite understandable owing to the fact that for their direct influences, they have more sensitivity to our model inputs. And then finally, we also looked at the interaction between the injured and the number of ambulances. So this gave us a negative interaction. So the combined influence on the model output appears to be very low. So in this case, we had a weak interaction. So in conclusion, our study is focused on evaluating the effect of ambulance strategy on patient mortality outcomes in a disaster scenario. And one of the reasons why we went into this area of study is because we are motivated because of the need for the improvement of response coordination, the optimal allocation of resources in disaster, and also effective decision-making protocols within the oil and gas industry disaster management framework, and specifically in regards to how the interaction between healthcare system and deployed emergency services could affect patient outcome during and in the aftermath of a disaster episode. So to achieve this, the methodology we applied included our model conceptualization. We went further to code in form of formalization, and then generated data using the behavioral space feature. And then we went further to analyze and then verify via global sensitivity analysis. From our findings, we went further to infer that our agent-based modeling and simulation results revealed a significant impact of ambulance strategy on mortality outcome from the system, and we were able to verify this by the sensitivity analysis outcome that we also obtained. And so in putting all this into perspective, the combination of these tools, including the agent-based modeling and simulation, NetLogo tool, and the global sensitivity analysis, basically provided us with a deep exploratory understanding of complex system dynamics in disaster settings, and also gave us insight into disaster response and also healthcare modeling and simulation. So thank you for listening.
My presentation today is, the title, as you see on the screen, it calls the impact of the post-flood buyouts and the vulnerabilities. This is a case study on the relocated households after the 2017 and 2019 floods in Quebec, in Canada. So to let you to understand a little bit of the context, I would say that that this case is in Canada, on the eastern side of the Canada, eastern coast of the Canada, and it's a small town. It's called Rigaud, and by being flooded 2 times after 2017 and 2019, based on the the certain policies and legislations, finally a certain amount of the households, number of the households had to relocate, and it is called the planned relocation or buyouts as a part of the the transformative adaptation policies to climate change. So in this study, which is based on the grant that received by the Quebec government, is a provincial government in Canada, we designed a project. When I say we, it's a team of the researchers, including Lisa Bernstein, is a professor at the McGill University, Gonzalo Lizarralde is a professor at the University of Montreal in Quebec, Manil Jamal, she's a researcher at the research center it calls RISK. Armita Farzatnia is also a research assistant in this project, and including myself, I'm a researcher at the the University of Montreal. So in this project, we design different number of the research objectives, including identifying causal factor of the vulnerabilities that eventually, they led those vulnerable households to demolish their houses and relocate from flood-prone areas. When I say that flood-prone areas, you should imagine that it's a very, the prestigious area that, the mostly advantageous households live with the very beautiful, the scenery and the view, and by being forced to relocate is already a disadvantage for those households. They're comparing those who had the permit and had the chance of staying there. Then the relocation, we consider it as a the vulnerability, and we wanted to understand what is the causal factor of those vulnerabilities. And then the second objective was to examine the adverse consequence of those post-flood recovery intervention, most specifically the relocation policies, in particular, and the vulnerable households, in fact, actually. And the third one is identifying effective intervention to reduce risk, and also ensure the longer-term recovery of the vulnerable households. The idea was to, if there is necessarily a relocation, how we can reduce the side effect, the negative effect of that intervention. For doing that, we applied two the methods, quantitative and qualitative. In terms of the quantitative, we went to understand what was common the attribute of those houses. I'm talking about only physical aspects here. Those houses being destructed, demolished, and their households, their occupants had to relocate from that area. And also, in the qualitative part of the research, we wanted to understand what is the negative or probably positive impact of that relocation on the social aspects of the households. So here, on the quantitative aspect, on the quantitative part of the study, we came with a comparative, the statistical attribute of the houses. So just to let you know a little bit briefly about the context, I would say that after the flood, there was a team of the estimators. They estimate the amount of the damage on every house. And if they come up with a calculation of the amount of the damage exceed 50% of the household values, those houses were sentenced to destruction and demolition, and the household had to relocate. But if the amount of the damage remain less than 50% of the house value, the household had the chance to reconstruct and recover their houses and again remain in that area. So that just the matter of the amount of the damage versus the value, the house value. So, but it wasn't enough for us. We wanted to go further to understand, based on the physical attribute of the houses to understand a pattern of destruction and demolition, they're comparing to the other houses who had the chance to remain. For example, we we came with the idea of comparing the house age, for example, understanding how old is the house, the size of the living area, lot area, the number of the rooms, and also we come up with the idea to compare the market value of those houses. Yeah, I will, in the next slide, I will explain how we calculate the market value, and then based on the foundation and the property type of the, property type of those houses. So as you see, on the second column, the number 64 within the attribute of the zero, it means that the houses who didn't demolish, who had the chance to remain intact, you will see that the median age, okay, is much younger. Okay, you will have the the summary here on the left side of the screen. Those houses who didn't relocate, who didn't who remained in place, they were about 14 years younger. So if the house was older, had more chance to be demolished. Living areas after the houses were being demolished was about 40 square meter smaller. So it means that the modest house, smaller houses being, the more, they had the chance of being demolished. The lot area, but contrary to the, the living area, the lot area was much bigger. So it means that the houses who had the modest occupation of the land had a more chance of the being demolished. And again, rooms were about 1.5 room less, and the market value was even also less expensive. And regarding the foundation and our inventory, we didn't have access to so many of the files, and we couldn't really calculate, regarding the foundation types. And also in terms of the property type, those houses who had a simple one-floor houses had more chance of being demolished. So as you see, those houses who who had a smaller occupation, very modest occupation, but being older had a more chance of being demolished. And that comes very closely with the idea of the social vulnerability as well, because those occupants of those houses, the being usually, the most disadvantaged households, fairly, I would say that relatively not that much wealthy comparing to their neighbors. Mostly the occupants were much older, and that they were much how I would say is the just very simple occupation of the land, I would say that. So, but for the social vulnerability, in terms of the social aspects of the vulnerability, you will see that we come up with some ideas regarding the household vulnerability in terms of the place attachment, in terms of the risk perception, in terms of the physical condition, and also socio-demographic status of the households. So we interviewed 11 households who've been relocated after 2017 and 2019. That was very difficult to reach them out. We had to call about 100 households to be able to succeed talking with 11 households. That was semi-structured interviews, a bit long interviews, and based on those, the interviews, we come up with some results. For example, in terms of the vulnerabilities, in terms of the social demographic status, we come up with the idea that most of the households being relocated were mainly nuclear families, including one old person household or households made up of one adult couple without children. That was very common in the relocated households. In terms of the risk perception, the most of the households, they said that they never had the idea of those houses being flooded ever, and their experience, if there was available, date back to 1995, 1984, or even 1976. So those households, they didn't have any perception of the risk of the floods. And in terms of the economic factors, we come up with a conclusion that the interviews mostly mentioned the lack of flood insurance coverage. So they didn't even have a flood insurance as well. And the lack of financial means for major renovation. So it means that if the households had the financial capacity to, for example, protect their houses before flood, they had a huge chance of surviving. They had this huge chance of the surviving their houses and not being relocated. So not having financial means had a direct association with this destruction and demolish and finally relocation from the flood-prone areas. And also in terms of the economic consequences of the relocation, we come up with the conclusion that the minor impact sometimes had on relocated households. For example, they spend some money for the replacement of their belongings and their resettlement process, but the measure impact was more severe. For example, less work hours during the flooding. They had to just to stay at home, protect their houses, being lots of enduring lots of the mental pressures, extra house protection expenses, higher resettlement expenses, more than what they received as a compensation. They receive usually the value of maximum $250,000, but with that amount of the money, they never be able to replace their house as it was. But finally, they ended up living in the condominium, in the apartment, somewhere in the downtown. That was a huge loss for them. And also, in terms of the property market value, especially after the COVID, 2 years of the COVID, as most of the youth that you also maybe experience in your home country, the real estate value skyrocketing during the COVID, it became more expensive, and those who had a chance to stay in the flood-prone area, their house value sometimes even became doubled versus those who relocated, and their the tiny modest apartment or flat in the downtown didn't gain much. So in terms of the social the social gaps, it even became more exacerbated and wider. And the interviews found that relocation and compensation very disadvantageous to them, and they felt that it was a very, the negative experience on their well-being. In terms of the mental health consequences, from the psychological point of the view, respondents mentioned situation of the anxiety and fear, and in terms of the bureaucratic rigidity, they said that those bureaucratic rigidity, they caused them fear and anxiety as well. And despite the desire to escape the situation obviously affected their lifestyle as well. As they experienced lots of the pressure, lots of the anxiety, they want to just finish that period. They wanted to just escape the situation that caused lots of the mental health negative consequences. In terms of the social consequences, obviously, by being, they relocated from the area, they lost their ties to the community. They lost their ties to the environment. Place attachment here, the regard for those households living in the flood-prone areas very close to the river, mostly is attached to the environment rather than community. And by being, the moved from that area, they experience lots of the the negative feeling. Yeah, I will finish it in 2 minutes. Thank you. And as I said, place attachment, not so much to the neighbors and neighbor community, but mostly to the environment, to their the community connection to the river, trees, birds, and so on. And in terms of the relationship with authorities, very negative consequences, because after that, they lost their confidence with the government, mostly with the provincial government and the the local government. They lost their confidence and their trust. And also, they always blame the civil security department in the local government of the Rigo, and also they always blame the hydro system, as they blame that the hydro system, they couldn't manage to keep the doors of the dam closed and shut during the flood, and being able to manage appropriately the amount of the water release in the river. And in terms of the the recommendation, we come up with the conclusion that if buyout is eventually necessary and vital, it has to be available anytime, not only after disasters. It has to be the information clearly communicated, involve the community in decision-making participation. Everything has to be very clear, very comprehensive, mostly even for the elder households. And also the amount of the compensation, as we experience in our southern, the neighbor community, the neighbor country in the US, the compensation has to be fair, adequate, and equivalent of the market value, to the market value of the houses. In that case, we will have more chance of being successful. And also, in terms of the equitable and respectful of the affected resident, it has to engage the community. The community has to be engaged, and their needs and concern has to be taken into consideration. And I assume that my time is over. And I will be more than happy to share my PowerPoint file with the dear participants.